On Tuesday, March 16th at around 5 p.m., 3 Atlanta area spas were staffed by Asian workers were the targets of a racist and sexist mass shooting. 8 people were killed, 7 of whom were women, and 6 of the women were Asian. The shooter, a 21-year-old white male, admitted to this heinous crime shortly after he was arrested later that night. Atlanta residents and Asian Americans across the country are horrified by this egregious act of terror. The Party for Socialism and Liberation extends heartfelt condolences and solidarity to all the victims and families of this despicable massacre. Anti-Asian and anti-woman bigotry is a symptom of the capitalist and imperialist system. Unity and justice require commitment to fighting for a new system. As of today, local authorities and mainstream media still refuse to label this a hate crime. 4 of the victims were of Korean descent. And according to a South Korean news site, Chuseon, the shooter was heard saying, quote, "I'm going to kill all Asians," end quote. The alarming rise of white supremacy and fascism cannot be overstated. Nearly 3 out of every 4 mass shootings can be linked back to right-wing extremism. Contrary to the misleading trope of Asian-Black conflict, community organizers have rejected this attempt to divide Black and Asian communities. We understand that this inextricable link between white supremacy, patriarchy, racism, and the war drive is the root cause of this violent atrocity. We cannot make sense of this mass shooting without understanding the imperialist, sexist, and racist context in which we currently live in. The shooter himself admitted his fantasy of, quote unquote, eliminating sexual temptation from places he frequented, which reveals the deeply misogynistic character of this crime.
Hi, I'm Riley Bove. I'm with the Answer Coalition, and I'm with the Indianapolis branch of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm a disabled Korean person, and we're out here to protest against the rise of anti-Asian violence and the anti-China rhetoric that the United States government and corporate media has been putting out.
All right, awesome. And what do you hope that this event might build towards in terms of fighting anti-Asian discrimination, hatred, and violence?
I really hope it builds to a movement, an anti-war movement, specifically an anti-imperialist movement here in the United States against U.S. imperialism, not only towards China, obviously it's towards China now, but towards, the ending of U.S. imperialism, the ending of U.S. militarization in Asia, and the ending of this type of rhetoric that has been postured in the media. I'm hoping to see, more of solidarity between entire movements, and hoping to, build towards that anti-war, anti-imperialist movement that, that's been building off ever since 2003.
When the Asian community is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When the Asian community is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
Awesome. Thank y'all.
So the United States was the only major capitalist power that was left unarmed during World War II, right? Naturally, after the war ended, the United States became the superleader of capitalism. It accounted for 60% of the world's gross national product, with only 6% of the planet's population at the end of the war. The Soviet Union emerged as the second strongest world power, and therefore were considered an existential threat to imperialist and capitalist powers. In fact, imperialists at the time were trying to kill the Bolshevik baby in the crib, right? The United States set out to create a worldwide imperialist united front to defeat the forces of communism and socialism that are taking state in numerous countries. The aftermath of World War II not only changed the focus of the war, it also brought along the reorganization of world global politics. On one side was the imperialist camp that was led by the United States, and on the other side was the camp of the workers and the oppressed peoples based on the rise of the Soviet Union as a global power and the radical empowerment of revolutionary forces in Europe and in Asia. Asia became the center of communist-led revolution in post-World War II period. And you fast forward to now, March 2021, the commander of US military forces in the Pacific region submitted a request to Congress for $7.3 billion in new anti-China spending. The Admiral Philip Davison, who can fairly be termed as an anti-China fanatic, led the Indo-Pacific Command made up of 380,000 military and civilian personnel and a vast area of air, land, and sea weaponry.
My name is Timmy. I'm with the PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation. This event was to stand in solidarity with the Asian community, especially due to the recent attack on the Asian community on March 26th. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. And what were you hoping? What do you hope, I should say, that this event might lead towards in terms of like a broader strategy of combating anti-Asian hate, discrimination, and violence?
I think that like first and foremost, it's very important to like just in general realize that like there is no one issue that's separate from anything. Like they're all interconnected, right? And like just like why we have events like this, first of all, like to get the message out there that like there's bad shit happening. There is reasons why bad shit is happening, and it's like more reasons behind like the surface level reasons than they tell us, right? Like they tell us that like with the shooting, like people barely out of it, you know? It was barely like publicity, and it's like people started talking, more Asians started talking about it, and then like everyone's like, okay, yeah, like this shit is really happening, and it's like, and then when people talk about it, just talk about it in like, oh yeah, this happened, it's a bad event, it's like an isolated thing, but it's not. It's like they're all connected, right? They're all connected to the fact that like there has been like constant anti-Asian Asian sentiments in our policies, in our media, in our communities. We're all like, even unintentionally, right, we parade this like xenophobic, this is what I'm looking for, xenophobic thoughts, and we have to first of all be aware of them, let people be aware of the fact that like, you know, this is bad. It's also bad for you to think like that, but it's also bad for you to not know why you think like that, right? Like this part, like with what I said in my speech, right? The guy just like asked for so much money for what? Like we can't just support things like that without questioning why, you know, why they need this much money. Like what do you need this much money for? What is it going to? What do you know? What's going to happen to these people that you're saying you need the money for? And so yeah, what I hope, I guess, to come out of all of this is for more people to understand that like anti-Asian sentiments aren't just like isolated from the rest of all of our struggles. All of our struggles are interconnected, and we all need to like constantly show up for each other, right? And constantly like point out that like not only are these struggles interconnected, we cannot like get rid of one of them without getting rid of all of them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so what you're saying is kind of like you're hoping that it like exposes some like contradictions and the history, as well as about like various types of like discrimination in the U.S. Like, you know, how this isn't like an isolated event, but like there's a lot of history too with things like Chinese Exclusion Act. Is that like a pretty fair representation?
Yeah, that is that's exactly very succinct actually. Which I said those words. Oh yes, actually yes, I agree. Yeah.
So we are here today and rallying in 60 cities around the country to show solidarity with our Asian brothers and sisters who are dealing with anti-Asian violence, who are angry and seeking justice for the same. We are here to show those who would seek to harm our Asian brothers and sisters that we will not allow this violence to stand. We will not allow it to go unpunished. The xenophobic racism has been coming from politicians of all stripes, the news media, and everything in between. They continue to engage in anti-Chinese propaganda so they can manufacture consent for war. That's better. I think that sounds better. And what does it mean to manufacture consent? It means that when the US government, the warmongers in DC and Western capital have targeted a nation for imperial plunder, that they will make up any news story they can about human rights abuses or whatever to get the American people behind a new drive to go to war. And once they go to war, what happens? Brown and black people die. People of color are killed in countries all over the globe. And we've seen this before in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. I mean, they literally lied about WMDs, and no one seems to care. They lied us into a war that killed a lot of sons, fathers, daughters here, but also killed over 1 million Iraqi men, women, and children. America has the largest prison population in the world. Where's the freedom and the human rights here when black people are killed, are endorsed being killed by the police, and they are never punished for what they do? Okay? How many mosques have been shot up because anti-Muslim hatred? So what we see is every time that a racialized group is targeted, they get demonized in the media by the politicians. And what happens? People in this country then, well, racist people in this country then go and target them for racial hatred and hate crimes. That's what this all leads to. What do you think calling something the Wuhan flu or the China virus does? And it's repeated in the media over and over again. And these fucking idiots, they believe it, and then they go and get a gun and do shit like this. We can't have that. We have to fight against these narratives that continue to be recycled and pushed to the populace through the media. You have to understand that the media also has an agenda for all of this. They get paid for news coverage. They want to see certain things happen. So we have to call out this anti-Asian violence. We have to call out the propaganda. You know, in one news story they say stop anti-Asian hatred, but then in the next one they tell you that China wants to eat your babies. That's a contradiction that doesn't make any fucking sense. So, what we're here today is to say is that the black community stands with the Asian community. We stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are oppressed, who continue to face racial violence, racialized violence as minority groups in this country. And now we all have to fight together and come together to go against this, because together is how we become stronger and how we fight against the hatred that we continue to see in both of our communities. Now, are there issues between each community? Yeah, you have people in each community that might hate each other, but overall, we are with one another, and we have to show solidarity with one another and continue to fight side by side, because we are in a fight together against racialized violence. and we have to stop submitting to fear. Now, why do they want you scared all the time? Why do they constantly pump fear through the TV into your mind? Why do they want you afraid of black people? Why do they want you afraid of Asian people, of Chinese people, of immigrants, of Muslims? It's because they otherize you in order to separate you. And then once people are separated from one another and fearing one another, it's much easier to dominate you. So I urge everyone to dig deeper, to do research. Forget about what you're told about other oppressed nations, other black and brown countries that you're told in the corporate white news media. Because, you know, Asada Shakur once said, only a fool Let somebody else tell them who their enemy is.
Well, I'm Chris. I am a member of PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation, here in the Indianapolis branch. We put this event together because we are about organizing, being in the community, and bringing people together to understand what's actually happening, to heighten people's consciousness so that we can combat, these problems, right? The anti-Asian racism, the anti-black racism, these all have the same roots, right? And we have to pull at those roots. So we're trying to reach people by, putting together protests and rallies like these when things happen so that people can see that this is what we need to do. We need to come together, we need to organize, and we need to be out here fighting, resisting the bullshit propaganda that continues to be pumped through the media to the minds of the people. Well, what I really hope is that we can build a, multinational movement, a solidarity movement between groups so that we can fight against this, because we're all splintered into our own groups, and this sort of ethos of American individualism that the only thing that's good is my own good and I only care about my own individual self. That doesn't work. We have to think about the collective, and it's all of us together fighting against the racism, pushing back against the white supremacy, because like you said, you take a hand, and you got all these fingers that individually they can do certain things, but when you ball up a fist and you bring all those fingers together, you can strike a real blow. And that's what we want to do. We want to strike a blow against white supremacy, against imperialism, against capitalism, because we want this shit to stop yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like a kind of Rainbow Coalition part 2 kind of thing is kind of what you're thinking. I mean, bringing everybody together.
That would be great. I mean, because we can't do it alone, right? I mean, we all have to organize within our communities, right, and outside of our communities. And if we can do those things, and we can bring if we all came together to actually do this shit, there's nothing that we couldn't accomplish. We could stop all of this, right? Because if all of the oppressed nationalities, if all of the working folks came together and were on the same page, had unity of thought, unity of vision, unity of purpose, then there's nothing that can be done to keep us from reaching our goals, which is stopping the white supremacy, stopping the bombings in Iraq, Afghanistan, in Africa through AFRICOM, this continual war drive toward China, right? Starting with Obama in 2008, the pivot toward China. China wasn't even on anybody's radar, and then all of a sudden, the media is just hey guys, China wants to eat your babies. They want to do all these evil things to you. They're also eating other people's babies. It's crazy. And people just believe that shit. They just believe it. Same thing. I mean, we saw this, like I said, with Muslims, right? They say all this shit about Muslim people when the Muslim faith. I'm not even a religious person, but I've studied religion, right? And the Muslim faith is a peaceful religion. But if you go to someone's country and you bomb their fucking parents and their kids and their mothers, daughters, fathers, and sons who are at a wedding, well, guess what's going to happen? They're going to hate you, right? They're going to, who did that? Oh, these guys who've been in our country for 30 years. Why is my neighbor a fucking U.S. soldier? Why are you here? Right. So we want to stop all of that shit. We want to stop the war. I mean, we spend $2 billion a day on murder weapons. A day. Every day of this country, we spend $2 billion on weapons to kill and murder people. What if we spent that money on healthcare, on education, on making people smarter, right? Instead of going and put it in the pockets of people like Dick Cheney and Halliburton.
Right. Yeah, definitely, and why spend that money pushing some ridiculous story about Xi Jinping personally travels to Xinjiang every day and eats 20 babies or whatever.
Right. Or crazy shit about Kim Jong-un that everybody has to have the same haircut. That is it's so ridiculous. And people are just oh yeah, I believe it. But then, the same shit happens here where people have Trump burger joints, and they don't think that's some ridiculous mind warping shit. No, you are what you think other people are, and you don't know anything about any other country, let alone your own goddamn country. So how are you going to tell somebody else about what's happening in somewhere that you've never seen, haven't even read anything about? People literally don't do any Googling, They just listen to the media and they adopt that position. They don't develop their own position. They just take someone else's and say, yeah, I believe that, instead of like, okay, I'm going to do my research, I'm going to learn and figure this thing out and come up with my own thoughts. They don't do that.
Yeah.
People like to be told what to think here.
All Asian nature has got to go.